Take charge of your leadership development. Join our How to Take the Lead Substack community for bonus materials, exclusive content, and discussions that will challenge and change the way you lead. Visit howtotakethelead.com to find out more.
Hello, we're back again. I know we said goodbye at the end of the last episode, which was the official end of series 1, but we did want to do a wrap up for the series. I don't know about you, Carrie-Anne, but I really hate those shows where basically they just rehash all the content that you've either watched or listened to over the past few weeks, and then they make a best of. I want new content. I want behind the scenes. I want the tea. Is that how these young people say it? I want the tea.
I don't know. I've never heard that.
Clearly, I'm not young enough to know. You're listening to How to Take the Lead with Lee Griffith
and Carrie-Anne Wade,
2 corporate colleagues turned business besties who question everything we've ever learned about leadership.
What started with us putting the world to rights over a gin after work is now a weekly show challenging the myths and perceptions and exploring what leadership looks like in the modern day.
We'll also be sharing our experiences and stories along the way.
You can find our show notes at howtotakethelead.com.
Hit subscribe to receive new episodes every Thursday.
Plus, we'd love for you to rate or leave a review of the show.
And please share your thoughts and stories on the topics we cover using the hashtag HowToTakeTheLead. You've probably heard me talk about Below Deck before. If I love an after party where it's like, did that really happen? Did so and so sleep with so and so? I mean, we obviously none of that goes on behind the scenes of How to Take the Lead.
What sort of podcast series do you think this is, Lee?
But I want more than just the best bits. So that's what we're giving you today. We wanted to have a bit of reflection, maybe on some of the discussions that we've had this series. I know I've certainly had moments where, we've been messaging each other going, this would have been great to discuss in the episode. Oh shit, how did we miss that?
I know.
Thing over there.
And isn't it always the way that we've recorded an episode and literally the next day something happens? We're like, why did that not happen yesterday? Because that would have been brilliant for the episode. So there has been a constant back and forth on the WhatsApp.
We want to put it right in this episode. That being said, it's highly probable that all the things that I've thought of over the series, I promptly will forget as we have this conversation, and I'll still be on the WhatsApp a bit later.
That's absolutely fine. I don't mind. And I have to say, one of my first reflections is I'm not sure the soapbox came out as much as I was anticipating it would, because we had that chat before we started, didn't we? That there's probably going to be, and there definitely have been soapbox moments, but I don't feel like I've had to dust it off as many times as I thought for you to step up on, Chile.
No, I think I've perhaps been, a little bit more mature in my outlook in this series.
More mellow.
Not so hot-headed as obviously the Insta Brigade brings out on me.
I love it.
So to kick things off with my coaching hat on, what have you learned about yourself, Carrie-Anne, through this last series?
What have I learned about myself? Well, do you know what? This sounds like a really cliched thing to say, but my learning is that there's always more to learn.
Yeah.
So no matter how much experience you have, there is always more to learn. There's always a different perspective to the one that you've got. There's always areas that you can develop in. And I've also figured out that it is actually okay not to know it all and not to have all the answers. And actually part of what helps your development, I think, as a leader and as a human being is just to be more curious and to explore a bit more the things you don't know about, get a different point of view on the things you think you do know about. So for me, it's been nice to think I don't have to know it all and that's okay. And actually, I'm going to learn more things along the way. And I guess one of the other things that's been quite an eye-opener for me, and it's made me, I knew this anyway, but I think it's made me think it even more, just the power of our words and our actions on other people, and that we should never underestimate that. And hopefully through this series of Take the Lead, we've had some positive impact for people, getting them to think in a different way, consider their leadership style. But I think also some of the conversations that we've had around different topics, we've shared examples where it's really made you realise, on the flip side of that, the negative impact that people's words and actions as leaders can have on others. So that's something that I think was on my mind when you asked that, Lee.
I felt that it's been so easy to find things to talk about. And that was always a worry when we first started How to Take the Lead over on Insta all that time ago. We questioned, would we have enough stuff to talk about? And we've revisited themes, and we've looked at themes from different angles and all of that kind of stuff. But I don't know, it just feels like there's a real movement at the moment of the types of things that we need to be talking about in the leadership world, and people are starting to be more open to having those types of conversations. And I don't think necessarily the things we've talked about are groundbreaking. We've certainly, there's been a few occasions where we've gone, oh, so and so's been talking about that, or I've seen this TikTok on that topic, or whatever, and we're like, oh, are we just being the same as everyone else? But then my reflection has been, well, no, there's obviously a real need for people to be having more of those conversations, and we all bring our own unique experiences and views on each of these topics. And I think we could redo this whole series again, and we would come out with different things on the topics as well, because they're so of the moment, and they are so different to perhaps what the leadership lens looked like maybe a decade or so ago.
And it's funny, isn't it? Like, there have been a few times where we've seen content elsewhere where we're like, oh, we've literally just recorded an episode of the podcast about that. And there's that moment where you feel slightly disappointed, as in like, oh, someone else is talking about it. But actually, that's brilliant. Good people are talking about it, because it means it is important stuff in that leadership space. It's conversations that we need to be having and that we should be encouraging others to have and being more open about. So yeah, like you, I've tried to flip that onto a more positive note to go, no, that means we're on the right track with what we're talking about, and we're talking about things that are important to people.
Yeah. Is there anything that you've, I suppose, learned more about through the course of our discussions, or perhaps changed your mind since we've discussed it?
I mean, the standout one for me, which is going to be really obvious when I say it, and we talked about this, I think, in the episode, was around the allyship. I'm got to say it right either now. I've caught it off you. Allyship conversation, definitely, as I think I realise that sometimes I have not taken action on things because I've been fearful that I don't know enough about them. And the learning for me through not only the conversation we had as part of the How to Take the Lead series, but conversations we had around that episode, and I'll mention it because it was definitely one of your big soapbox moments around Cricket Scotland. But that conversation that we had around that, and then the subsequent episode, made me realise that actually, if I am in a space, or you are as a leader in a space where you feel slightly fearful that it's like, I'm not going to make a comment on this because I don't know enough about it, actually pause for a moment and reflect, because the fact that you don't know enough about it is the exact reason why you should be taking action. That's definitely something that I've learned for me, that actually that was the point that I should have gone, I need to understand more about this and take action. It's not the time for me to do nothing. So that for me was one of my bigger standout moments, I think, in terms of my own thinking and what's changed for me.
I had a couple of people message me similarly after that episode came out, and they were saying that they've definitely either need to pay more attention or not to be scared to talk about stuff because they don't know enough about the topic. And obviously on that episode we were talking specifically about cricket. I have to say I'm still on my soapbox about it though, and I'm almost becoming like the angry old person that writes to the letters
What
pages.
did you message me the other day about Nicola Sturgeon? You're like, she didn't want to say something about Cricket Scotland being institutionally racist, but she's going to tweet about, was it I can't remember, was it Kate?
Kermit the Frog, was it?
Kermit the Frog. It was something really so benign.
Yeah, so I might actually just have to mute her account because it's really irritating me. She tweeted about some journalist I don't know what the story is behind it. I don't know who the journalist is, but she did a tweet condemning some people that were offensive to this journalist and saying this, this isn't on treatment of people this way. And I thought I nearly did the angry response tweet, but I'm very conscious that that will come across in a way, and can't get over whether I'm just feeling really bitter about it all now, and so it's just grinding my gears, or whether actually I should continue to keep challenging it, because otherwise I'm accepting it and I don't know where I'm sitting in the situation. I'm really conflicted.
But do you know what I love is that we can have this conversation about being conflicted about things. And that's part of, I don't know, part of why I feel so passionate about this podcast series and what came before it as well. 'Cause as you say, it was Insta Lives before, just about that ability to have those unfiltered conversations about things. And that's okay. So I think too many people keep stuff like that bottled up, and then it just, does it create an inertia or, like you say, a sort of passive acceptance of something, because actually really what's happening is you're conflicted inside and you don't know where to have the conversation to try and get to a space that you feel more comfortable in.
Yeah. As a brief aside, the lovely listeners can't see this, but I can see Carrie Ann's lovely face on the screen as I'm talking. She's adjusted her glasses, so one is much higher than the other.
Sorry, I've just caught sight of myself and it is so off-putting. It's because I've realised I need to do something with this. It's so boring for the listeners. I need to do something with this screw on this arm of my glasses because it's too tight and it digs in behind my ear, and it's worse when I've got the headphones on.
Okay.
But if I take them off, you just become a pixelated blur. So
Okay.
I can't work out which is worse. Worse for you to see me with I might as well just have a big plaster around the corner of the mantle,
Well,
like Jack Duckworth.
You've totally given me Jack Duckworth vibes. That is exactly who I was about to recall.
And this will be interesting for our listeners to know how relevant that reference is to some people and not to others.
Yeah. Message us and let us know if you got the reference or not, because it just help us with our demographic inequality data.
Right, I've readjusted them. Is that better? Is it less off-putting for you?
Yes, thank you. On the allyship front, I think the other thing that cropped out at me, actually you flagged it to me, was the Wellcome Trust, and that was a big moment in the last couple of weeks since we did that episode, and it was really refreshing to see a open and honest acceptance that they have not done well enough, that they've continued to review their practice since their first review. That it's a really hard read if you read the full report again, with examples of institutional racism within their organisation. But they've publicly acknowledged that and said we need to do better. And that was hugely refreshing to see a big company do that.
And I feel like, I spotted that and was like, have you seen this? Because I feel like it was so the opposite example of a cricket Scotland soapbox moment, to be honest with you. And, I felt like that was them taking some public ownership of it. And, there's more to do. They have to act now. They can't just say this is terrible. I absolutely get that. But I was also quite intrigued by some of the reaction on social media to that, because there were still the naysayers and still the people who were like, that's not good enough. But there was a pushback to those as well, which I found really heartening, of people going, hang on a minute, give them a break. How many times do you see people calling themselves out for their really terrible behaviour and saying we must do better? Not that often. So I kind of like the backlash to the backlash, if that makes sense.
But that also goes to show that as a big organisation or as a leader of a big organisation, you are never going to get it right. You're never going to get everyone on side, no matter how great your activity or announcement or whatever it might be is. That's the beauty of the world, isn't it? The diversity of thought and the ability to be able, in a democratic country, to have those conversations where people don't have to agree with each other, and that's great. As a leader, it can be hard if people don't agree with your ideas or your suggestions or whatever, but I don't think that should put you off, or you think that was a negative thing to do because some people criticize it.
And I think that Wellcome Trust example was a really good one of the leadership team there acting with integrity, because they probably knew that, because as we all do, the moment you put anything on any form of social media, there's always going to be somebody who disagrees with you, wants to say something negative, worst case scenario is going to troll you for it. That's sadly the world that we live in. But like you say, people are allowed to disagree. I'd like them to do that more respectfully. But I liked the fact that the Wellcome Trust didn't just go, well, we could do that, but we're probably going to get loads of backlash for it, so we just won't. I feel like they acted with real integrity and purpose and want to make change by being that open and putting it out there themselves.
Another episode where I afterwards thought, we missed the boat, was the one around power dressing and the power suit. And we saw Virgin Atlantic issue their new guidance to staff saying that they could have their tattoos on show and basically embrace their personality in the way that they dress, while still having a uniform but not being so restrictive. And I thought that was such a welcome and positive step forward in accepting, because we all know organisations that say, oh, it's unprofessional to have tattoos or piercings or anything like that. So I thought that was a really positive step forward for an organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And God, that episode feels like so long ago now. Is that episode 2, Ditch the Power Suit?
Yeah, it was.
Gosh, but I think what a different space to be in as well, because it just, as you mentioned, Virgin Atlantic there, and them being more accepting and being more relaxed about the dress code for their staff. Just thinking about like how different that is from the British Airways example from many years ago now about the person who wanted to wear a cross. It's just really interesting, isn't it? How much what people wear and how much that shows of themselves, their personalities, their beliefs has an impact on others, but how accepting or not people can be of that.
Hi there, if you're enjoying this episode of How to Take the Lead, please hit subscribe and go leave a review or a rating. We'd also love to hear your stories and thoughts on today's topic. Please DM us, our links are in the show notes, or tag us into your socials using the hashtag How to Take the Lead. Were there any other episodes that you, after the fact, went, oh, damn, I should have?
Yeah, I think there were a few different episodes actually where we sort of touch on where you might be a bit on the back foot as a leader, or where you might be stereotyped, or where people might treat you differently because of some of your characteristics. And I think there was been quite a lot of stuff that's come up around sort of sexism recently, which made me think, oh, there's definitely some conversations we've had where that would have been a really good example. And I guess one I just saw, I think yesterday or the day before, and that's terrible, it slips my mind who it was now, but a female CEO who tweeted that she'd been invited, that she had a client meeting that she should have been invited to, and actually only her male colleague got invited because the client thought she was the PA, and actually she was the chief executive. And that was quite interesting, because I think she was calling out some everyday sexism there that is around. But again, the kind of comments back I found interesting, people on different sides of that debate. And I wasn't really clear what she did. So she tweeted that happened, but I wasn't clear what action she took and whether she felt she could take any. But I thought that was quite interesting.
It reminds me of, and I can't think of the company now. I want to say it was AXA or something like that. It was one of those big financial or insurance type companies, and they've got a female chief exec, and it was at the AGM where they had shareholders standing up making really sexist comments, and it was really good that the male chair of the board
called them out
and said, we will not tolerate that. And I thought that was such a good example of allyship, isn't it, really?
Yeah. And being a good leader, absolutely,
Yeah.
and acting with integrity rather than just sitting there and listening to your colleagues saying things that you actually don't find acceptable.
You know, it shows that sense of when you are demonstrating allyship, it could be so easy to think when you're in, say, a public meeting setting or in a large group, to feel like, oh, because these are important stakeholders, we shouldn't annoy them, or we shouldn't disagree with them, or we need to keep them on side, so we should just go along with it. And I think you show greater integrity by standing up, because actually you'll have won a lot more fans from a broader audience than those shareholders.
And that plays into talking about respect and trust and that connection, doesn't it? That you're building with people, and people are going to have more respect for you, more trust in you, that you're there to do the right thing, and therefore build a better and stronger connection with you, for sure. So again, I feel like a lot of these topics cross over into numerous episodes that we've recorded. But while we are on the sexism thing, can I just briefly mention England women's football? And, you know, I think what a brilliant example of being amazing role models, encouraging younger generations to aspire to greatness, you know, filling stadiums more than any other other sporting team have done. I think that's really brilliant. But equally, there was a bit for me that made me a bit uncomfortable, where there have been a couple of conversations about how well the England women's football manager has done in terms of her leadership journey, where she's taken the team, and a few comments about, you know, need some of that in England men's football. And just a couple of comments that I've heard around, like, oh, a woman will never manage the English men's team. not just for football, I don't think, for many sports. And I just think,
Yeah.
what's that all about? Because actually, there are many successful women's sporting teams that are managed and led by men.
Yeah.
And we're okay with that, and we accept that, and we don't necessarily make a comment about it. But the idea that a hugely elite and successful men's sporting team could be led and managed by a woman seems to cause some sort of offence somehow.
It's interesting. I've name checked Rachel Botson before. I really enjoy her podcast. It's all about rethinking moments or something it's called. And this week I've been listening to her interview with Julia Gillard. I think that's how you pronounce her surname anyway, the former Prime Minister of Australia. And they're talking about rethinking misogyny. And there was something that stuck with me in the conversation, which was around she was referring to the fact that she was the first female Prime Minister of Australia, and the difference of the exam question she had to answer is, can a woman lead the country? And then she compares it to, say, the style of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. And she also referenced, I think it was Iceland, as the only two countries that have had 3 women leaders. And so the question of can a woman lead has been asked and answered in those countries.
It's
So
irrelevant, isn't
it's
it? now?
irrelevant.
Yeah.
So the question, therefore, that they need to answer is that next level of how do I want to lead? And so they can bring in more of their own style and the empathy and the compassionate leadership, because they don't have to prove that a woman can lead. And I thought that was such an interesting insight, and actually probably goes to the point you were making about the football,
Yeah.
because we've never had a woman leading. So that's the exam question everyone's trying to answer. Can a woman do
Yeah.
it? And until that happens, no one's going to move on.
Yeah, that is a really good sort of reference point, and I think that explains that example really well, because you're right. It's that for some people it's that unknown and that make an assumption. Well, no, they can't because they never have before. Whatever thing we're talking about doesn't have to be women leaders, but you're right. It like once the proof is there and we've evidenced that actually people are quite capable of doing that. You're right. It does change the question, doesn't it? But I guess it's slightly infuriating that that's the exam question sometimes, because it's
Yeah.
like, oh, what do people need to do? Like, and that there is that need, isn't there, sometimes to prove yourself, prove that you can do something, prove that you can be a good leader. But it's striking that balance, I guess, and what you're trying to prove it for and who to.
Yeah. And you think about America when it was Clinton and Trump going up against each other, and that was very much the question that she was having to answer. They couldn't see a woman lead, even
Yeah.
though there was a huge proportion of people in the country who wanted to see a woman lead. Those that eventually swayed the vote the other way just couldn't get their heads around that question. And you could question, have we've had 2 female prime ministers in England, but I don't think we've still fully answered that question when you look at how the media treats female leaders over here, or female political leaders.
I would absolutely agree with you. And if you go back to the Thatcher days, like how much of that debate and conversation about her style of leadership was focused on, and still is when people reference her, how much she had to adapt to be more like a man. So do you know what I mean? I think that's quite interesting, and actually we're in quite a different space now, but I don't know how a female politician would feel. I don't know what pressure Liz Truss, for example, in the current climate feels to adapt her leadership style to meet the needs of potential people who are going to be voting her in, versus how she genuinely would like to lead the country. Who knows?
Yeah,
That's a question for her, isn't it? But
she's channeling, isn't she? Very much channeling a Thatcher approach, and down to the clothing choices sometimes.
Yeah.
And so that does make you think that that's that archaic, old-fashioned way of leadership is still viewed as the way to lead, and that's a really sorry state. To start to wrap this up, which of the conversations that we've had, and I think we've touched on a couple that have really stuck with us already, but which have stuck with you the most, or perhaps changed the way that you've approached something?
The one for me that got me thinking about my own approach to things was actually weirdly the one on storytelling. I don't know why I think that's weird, but it maybe surprised me, because I think as a communicator, I already know the benefit of storytelling, but I think it just did get me to reflect, have there been points in my leadership career where probably not necessarily tough times, but times when maybe things in the organization or what's going on for my teams felt a bit stagnant and a bit not going one way or the other, where actually I could have really benefited, as could my team have benefited, from more of that storytelling approach in leadership. So, sometimes when you're in those positions in a team where you're waiting for something, you're
Yeah.
waiting for clarity on what the organization's strategic priorities are going to be. So there's like a few months while that's all being worked up, or you're waiting for a consultation and a restructure to happen in your team. And in that period of waiting, I think you can sometimes leave a bit of a silence, and that doesn't help people feel motivated and ready for what's to come next and come on that journey with you. And I just reflected, there have probably been a couple of times where, had we had that conversation about storytelling back then, that I
Yeah.
probably would have done something a bit different with keeping people with me and wanting to be on that journey, rather than like hitting the pause button in the film and then restarting it a couple of months later and then wondering why people are not as excited by it or not as fired up by it. So that was just an
Yeah.
interesting one for me in terms of what it triggered.
Well, I think that actually goes to a bigger point around sometimes when you're leading something, it can all consume you, and you can get bored by it a lot quicker than other people because they're only having short, sharp interactions with that topic. There might be huge time lags in between when they are involved in that discussion or hear about it. But you as a leader might feel like, oh, I'm saying the same thing over and over again. And the temptation can be that you want to change things up so it stays fresh and exciting for you. But all you're doing is confusing and diluting the message to your staff. So I think that's a really important point to note if you are in that state of it feeling a bit.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, how about for you, Lee? What's
Um,
your thought?
I mean, the allyship has really stuck with me, and I won't rehash things that we've discussed. But I suppose one of the reflections that I've had is that it actually crossed so many of the discussions, but we didn't get into the meat of it in all the other episodes because we could have explored each topic through quite a specific lens. Emotional intelligence, for example, could have been discussed as, what does it mean to be emotionally intelligent as a woman nowadays, as a woman leader? Because that sense of a woman being emotional is so very different to a man being emotional, and that really fine line. And I just thought that was really fascinating that we've picked on all these topics, but actually there's so many subsets to each one that we could have looked through a lens when it comes to what does being an ally look like, or whatever it might be.
Oh, I feel like there's ideas coming for series 2 and 3 and 4 and however many series this podcast is going to run for.
The other area that I've reflected a lot on was our conversation around introverts and extroverts. I think because we both learned a bit about each other in that process and what it actually means, and I suppose myth bust some of those stereotypes of the typical extrovert and what they might be thinking behind the scenes and what an introvert might be thinking behind the scenes. And even since we had that session, I've still been seeing conversations around confidence and what does it mean to be confident, and people saying, there was something I was watching and I can't for the life of me think what it was now. And they were kept talking about the person being an introvert. And actually they were describing someone who was being shy. And it was very different, and it was really bugging me. And it's bugging me now that I can't. It's a really unhelpful example because I can't think of the show.
But I remember you talking about that in the episode, that actually like things get labelled incorrectly, and that, how being introverted can be seen as being unconfident, and actually you're not unconfident in your skill set, your experience, what you bring to the table. You just work in a different way.
Yeah, I remembered the show. It's the Rolling Stones show that's been on BBC.
Interesting.
And it was the, oh my goodness, what's the guitarist's name?
Are we talking Ronnie Wood or are we talking Keith Richards?
Keith Richards. It was his episode, and he kept talking about being an introvert, and other people were saying, he's an introvert. But what he was describing was being shy, and because he wasn't talking about needing the quiet space, he just liked being on his own. He didn't really like talking with people, and I just thought how funny that sense of confidence and all of that was wrapped up
Yeah.
and just labelled as he's an introvert. And actually the attributes that he was describing for me didn't resonate as an introvert.
Yeah, very interesting. And interestingly, one of the episodes that we've had feedback on from listeners, that it's really helped them to think differently, and particularly people who've then come out and said, I'm an introvert. And actually, I found that really interesting and really helpful. I was pleased by how much interaction we had when that episode had gone out, from people finding it really insightful and an opportunity to think differently about their own traits and their own kind of type, whether they're introverted or extroverted.
I think we've rubbed off on each other as well.
100%. Oh, the other week you said to me it's something, I'd have never done that before I met you. I feel like your extrovertism is rubbing off on me now. And then the other day I was like, yeah, I feel like I'm becoming more introverted and more knee about that. I really just, I feel like we have rubbed off on each other. So we can't do it too much, because if we come in the middle, we'll lose that yin and yang of what we bring. But I have enjoyed actually seeing how some of the episodes have landed with listeners as well, and getting their feedback about what they want to see or hear in future episodes. But, you know, ditch the power suit, interestingly, came up a few times. I'd seen on LinkedIn people, you know, making comments and sharing it and reflecting on what that's meant for them to listen to that conversation and their own experiences, which has been brilliant. And of course, the allyship one as well seemed to go down well with people in terms of them wanting to listen to it and sparking some thought and conversation for them.
So that is a wrap for series 1. We will be back with series 2 in October.
I know, and that's going to come round quickly. But fear not, if you can't wait until October to get your fill of How to Take the Lead, in exciting breaking news, we are going to have our own social channels. So we ummed and ahed and thought about it, and we got through series 1, obviously utilising our own channels, didn't we, Lee? And we thought, actually, no, we're landing now in a space where Insta and Twitter are going to be the place where we need to start sharing more and enabling some of this conversation. So in conjunction with this after party episode going out, you will also be able to find How to Take the Lead on Instagram and Twitter.
So please give us a follow in our little late summer recess period as we prep for series 2. We will be launching content on both those channels. We'll have some of our best bits. We'll maybe have some prompts, things for you to consider based on some of the discussions of series 1. So we'd love for you to spread the word, tag us, all that kind of social shit.
Yeah, please engage with us, I think is what Lee was trying to say, not quite so politely.
So yes, we will put all our details in the notes section on the podcast for you to follow. If you're following either of us on any of the social channels, you'll see us talking about it as well. But at How to Take the Lead on Instagram, at How to Take the Lead, but with a number 2 on Twitter are the places to start following.
Absolutely. We will be spamming you.
No, not spamming. We're not annoying.
It's not spam and it's not social shit. It's all good. We'll be bringing you all the best content from How to Take the Lead across those channels.
That sounds more professional. Okay. On that note, we will see you again in October.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode.
Don't forget to hit subscribe so you're the first to receive new episodes when they drop every Thursday.
If you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you would rate it or leave a review.
And let us know your thoughts and own experiences.
Get in touch with either of us on LinkedIn, Twitter or Instagram.
Or use the hashtag HowToTakeTheLead.
Until next week, get out there and take the lead.